And now to politics and the government shutdown. This marks day 10 of this standoff. And at the center of the stalemate is President Trump's demand for money to build his border wall. The president initially called for $5 billion, a proposal that Democrats rejected. Well, now House Democrats plan to vote Thursday on a package of spending bills, as well as a stopgap measure to reopen the government. I want to bring in CNN congressional correspondent Phil Mattingly. He's going to walk us through some of the options for both sides. What are they?
Yeah, Brianna, look, as a former Capitol Hill correspondent, you recognize that it's been kind of boring over the last couple of days, no real legislative action, and that's about to change. And the reason it's going to change is because Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats are going to take the majority in the House on Thursday, and they are going to move quickly. Over the course of the last couple of days, they've been mulling three different options, maybe some short terms, maybe do the bill that they did in the Senate that the president ended up saying he wouldn't support. What they've settled on, as you noted, is passing 6 full appropriations bills. They're bipartisan. They were agreed on in the Senate. There are 7 total that still need to be passed. The 7th is the Department of Homeland Security bill. That's the one that the wall money would be included on. That will not be passed in full. What they are going to do is move a short-term stopgap bill for that one appropriations package and move the rest in full. They're going to then kick that over to the Senate. So then you move over to the Senate, which, as you know, Brianna, is still controlled by Senate Republicans. What are Republicans going to do when the House kicks over their package of appropriations bills? They have a couple of options. They could accept the House offer. They could amend that offer and perhaps add border security to it and then try and pass it and send it back, or they could wait for the president. Here's what they're going to do, at least at this moment, according to sources that I'm talking to. The third option. They're going to wait for the president. Senate Majority Leader has made clear he's not going to move forward on anything until he knows President Trump is behind it. So that leads you to, what are the president's options? Well, he could accept what House Democrats are going to do. I'm going to play spoiler here. That's not going to happen. He could propose some other compromise. Mike Pence, the vice president, had proposed one earlier that had been rejected. They could come back to the table on that. Or the third option, continue to hold out and continue to leave the government shut down. Right now, people I'm talking to still think number 3 is the most likely option, at least at this point. We will see legislative action this week, but Brianna, the bottom line here is so long as Democrats maintain their position, and they have shown no sign of moving, and the president maintains his, I'll direct you to his Twitter feed if you want to know where he stands on that, the shutdown is likely to continue. The question remains how long. The other question is what's the path out of it? People have ideas, but nobody at this point has an answer to either of those questions, Brianna.
A sad state of affairs here in Washington as we get into this new year. Phil Mattingly, I want to go to the White House now and bring in our White House reporter, Sarah Westwood. Sarah, you heard Phil. He just laid out the options there. It doesn't seem like either side is budging. Where is President Trump on all of this?
Well, Brianna, that's really unclear. It's not really clear what options the president is considering at this point. But here at the White House, things look a lot like they did 10 days ago, with the president dug in behind his demand for some amount of funding for a border wall, and Democrats dug in behind their refusal to fund it. And all of this is the president's aides and allies are trying to create confusion about what exactly qualifies as a wall, whether that's fencing, whether that's steel slats, or a concrete wall, as the president has suggested since his presidential campaign. Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff / budget director, has hinted that the president might be willing to come down off that $5 billion demand that he initially had. As Phil mentioned, there was an offer for about half of that on the table that Democrats didn't seem interested in, but there's not been a lot of specificity about what kind of deal the president would accept. Now, yesterday, after a 2-hour meeting with the president, Senator Lindsey Graham, who's a top ally of the president's on Capitol Hill, said that the president was open-minded and interested in a deal that would trade temporary DACA renewal of protections for those young undocumented immigrants known as the Dreamers in exchange for that $5 billion number. But we should note that proposals like that have been floated and failed on Capitol Hill before, so there's still not a lot of clarity about what kind of deal the president might accept to reopen the government. Brianna.
Very unclear. Sarah Westwood at the White House, thank you for that. Now, the president and Democrats are, no surprise, pointing fingers at one another over this. While there are 380,000 federal employees on furlough and another 420,000 who are working without pay. I want to get some perspective on the shutdown blame game from a retiring lawmaker, Republican Congressman Ryan Costello. Congressman, you are leaving. You are unencumbered by re-election when it comes to speaking about what you're seeing here. Who do you think is to blame for this government shutdown? Whose ask is unreasonable?
Well, the president's position has been unreasonable to the extent that somebody can understand what his specific position is. He's not going to get $5 billion for a wall. And the most mysterious unexplainable part in all of this is why the president decided that he'd rather deal with House Democrats than House Republicans in order to avert or get his way out of a government shutdown. And he's now going to, Phil's reporting indicates that the president's going to have a choice. Does he want to just isolate the Department of Homeland Security funding and the immigration issue and open up the other 6 appropriations bill funding, or does he just want to keep everything still shut down? And I understand why the Senate Majority Leader isn't going to do anything unless and until he understands what the president is going to sign, because the Senate already, to use the phrase, got caught with their pants down by passing something, and only after the fact did the president then say that he wouldn't sign it.
I wonder, when you heard Sarah's reporting there that he may be open to a short-term measure that includes DACA, I mean, I wonder what you think, because I would suspect that Democrats and Republicans, knowing how this issue has been introduced before, while certainly some are in favor of this, it seems like when it comes to the president in DACA, that gets him going back and forth on the issue and increases the lack of clarity about where he is on a potential breakthrough.
It does. I agree with that. But even more to the point, we had a bill this past summer that would have provided a more permanent solution for DACA than what is being reported as the more temporary solution. And Democrats wouldn't agree to that over the summer. So it's very difficult for me to think that Democrats would agree to something less than what they didn't agree to over the summer for DACA and swallow anything in the way of border security. We're starting to hear that Democrats view this as a moral issue, and I just don't see how House Democrats are going to vote for any more border funding for a wall. There might be a way to slice and dice this and have some border security measures in there, but I get back to the point, Brianna, that I think the president has backed himself into a corner. He owns this shutdown. He said it was going to be his shutdown, and he has not provided clarity on what he would agree to, and as a consequence, everything is ambiguous at this point. No one knows how to move forward, and now the Democratic House is going to be in control of putting forward clearly what it is they're willing to do in terms of funding the government. I think it's a lost opportunity for the president to have led on the issue.
I want to expand this discussion with the congressman here. Joining us, CNN political director David Chalian and Molly Ball, national political correspondent for Time and a CNN political analyst. So we're in the middle of this shutdown because of funding for the wall that the president promised to build. According to the outgoing White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, who gave a very interesting interview to the LA Times, he said this: the president still says wall. Oftentimes, frankly, he'll say barrier or fencing now that he's tended towards steel slats. But we left a solid concrete wall early on in the administration. Do you think, David, that the president is asking for something that he actually has abandoned?
No. We should remind people again, as you said about the president's promise, he also promised that Mexico would be paying for this wall.
That's
and this
right.
entire conversation is about the U.S. taxpayers funding this wall. He clearly has backed away from some of the promise, but no.
He'll say that in a roundabout way, Mexico will pay for this, right?
Right, but that's clearly not the case.
That's
His own
right.
acting chief of staff made that quite
That's
clear.
right.
So what the debate is here is about how much the American taxpayers are on the hook for this wall. I totally agree with the congressman, obviously, that the president is going to own the blame of this shutdown. But to your point, the president was out tweeting to respond to that John Kelly interview, saying he has not at all abandoned the notion of the wall because he hates to think for 1 second that his hardcore supporters will see him in any form of retreat on this key promise.
But will they, do you think, Molly?
I don't know, frankly, because we have seen with the Trump base a very large willingness to go along with Trump wherever he may lead. And I think, when you talked to Trump supporters during the campaign, a lot of them didn't support a literal wall or didn't think there would be a literal wall over the entire border, but they saw it as a metaphor. They saw his willingness to say it as refreshing, and they saw his willingness to stake out that sort of maximalist position in a negotiation. They liked that. So if he were to find some kind of compromise, to make some kind of deal, but the real problem here is that he's not able to make a deal, and I think that's what his supporters really want. want from the Donald Trump they voted for is that famous deal-making ability. Where is it? We haven't really seen it over the course of his presidency, and we're not seeing it now. There's no negotiation going on. There's just a president tweeting contradictory things all the time. One day tweeting a picture of these sort of Venetian blind-looking things, and the next day saying, no, it's still a wall. So it's hard to deal with, and this is why you have the Senate Majority Leader also saying we're not going to do anything until we know where he stands, because they know that they can't necessarily trust that he'll keep a position he takes from one day to the next.
Venetian blinds that are very pointy at the top. We should point out, right, that when he talks about the slats.